Good evening, and welcome to Behind the Book Caltech Magazine edition. My name is Omar Shamut, and I'm the senior editor of Caltech Magazine. Tonight, we're introducing a new component of Caltech's Behind the Book series that will give you a chance to hear more from some of the people covered in Caltech Magazine's print issues, and also to dig deeper into their work and experiences. All of our magazine stories are also available online at magazine.caltech.edu. This first installment of Behind the Book, Caltech Magazine Edition, is titled From Scientist to CEO. And our first panelist is Jess Adkins, the Smits Family Professor of Geochemistry and Global Environmental Science. He's also the CEO of Calcarea, a startup aimed at decarbonizing the shipping industry. Our second panelist this evening is Julie Schoenfeld, who is Caltech's Entrepreneur in Residence for Physical Sciences within the Office of Technology Transfer and Corporate Partnerships. Our moderator is Lori Dajose, a Caltech alumna and a science writer in the Office of Strategic Communications. Lori wrote the feature story in our spring 2023 issue about decarbonization. The panelists will also field some audience questions at the end of the event, so if you'd like to submit a question, please do so through the Q&A option within Zoom. Finally, I'd like to introduce Michael Alexander, Caltech's Campus Arts and Culture Liaison. Michael couldn't be here with us in person this evening, but he did record a video message. So take it away, Michael.
We want to thank our sponsors, the Caltech Employees Federal Credit Union and the Friends of Beckman Auditorium, whose support makes programs like this possible, and whose support has also made it possible for us to do a number of programs for young people. Students are coming out for the Junior Watsons. They're getting a chance to hear grad students do some incredible presentations on our Science Journeys programs as well. So we encourage you to check out our archives when you go to events.caltech.edu, and you can sign up to be on our mailing list as well so that you'll get notice of upcoming events. Our next event is going to be part of the Movies That Matter series, and that's happening on July 25th. And it is going to feature the film Chasing Coral. This is an important film dealing with what is happening in the ocean to coral and other living matter because of the growing acidity of the ocean and because of the rising ocean temperatures. So now it is with great pleasure that we welcome Lori Dajose in conversation with Jess Adkins and Julie Schoenfeld.
Thank you so much for those introductions, Omar and Michael. My name is Lori Dajose, and today I am so delighted to be speaking with Jess Adkins and Julie Schoenfeld about entrepreneurship at Caltech. So Jess and Julie, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Nice to be here.
So Jess, you have been a professor of geochemistry for decades, and recently you've
That just makes me feel old.
Recently you've made this pivot from the lab bench to starting your company, Calcarea. So why did you decide to make this big leap?
Yeah, I'm wondering that a lot these days as I make my way into work on the metro instead of just coming down the hill to Caltech. There's a lot of different reasons. The pandemic actually had a lot to do with it. We've talked about this a little bit before, where we all were sent home, right? And I ended up sitting in the back of my garage where there's a little office there, and you write as many review papers as you can, you get all the data out, and then you start thinking, like, what am I gonna do with this time? And one of the truly amazing things about Caltech, and I find inspiring all the time, is that it's really our job to think of the most important thing that we could possibly do. And we had a series of results in the lab that we can talk about that led towards us realizing that we had a shot at sequestering CO2 at scale. And the climate problem is the problem of our generation, at least from a technical point of view, of things that my skill set might have some ability to solve. And it became a little bit of like an earworm of, can I really solve this problem with continuing research about it? Or is it time to try and go make a larger impact on a wider swath of the world? And that earworm just grew and grew as I sat there in the back of the garage. I had a few people, like Julie here, sort of kicking me a little, saying, that is a good idea. You should think about doing that. Kevin Tidwell at the Grantham Foundation is another one. They had been funding us at Caltech on the basic research that led to us spinning out. And he kept saying, this looks pretty cool, Jess. Like, why wouldn't you want to make this into a company? And I think eventually I just sort of said, they're probably right. Like, if we're going to really go after the Caltech thing of making as big an impact working on the most important thing you can, that means trying to bring this out into the world as a company.
Yeah. So Julie, as one of Caltech's entrepreneurs in residence, you've helped commercialize a wide range of technologies, from photonics to medical devices to working with Jess's company. And all of these startups had each just started as an idea. So in your view, what are the common qualities that make an idea promising enough to take from the lab to the marketplace?
Well, it's first you have to recognize at a university you're starting very, very early. So many times investors want something that's well on its way, that's proven in the marketplace. But at a university, you're looking at some research, you're looking at what is potentially breakthrough research, and then you have to ask yourself, what problem are you trying to solve? And I spend a lot of time trying to sort through or help inventors sort through that question. We have a saying here that these are all hammers looking for nails, in that they have a great piece of technology, but we're not quite sure what to do with it. So the common theme that I look for is, what problem are you trying to solve? How is it being solved today? And why can you do it better? So you start with those three questions. And then, as all good scientists, you take this as a hypothesis, and then you need to test the hypothesis. So you want to go out and talk to people who have this problem, talk to 100 people who have this problem, and see if they react the right way. And so that's kind of the common theme, is find a good problem to solve, make sure you can solve it better, and then make sure that a lot of customers want it.
Yeah, this is actually riffing off that. So true about some of the stages that we went through. We were working on the problem of the dissolution rate of calcium carbonate in the ocean for a decade. We being me and my good friend and co-founder of Calcarea, Will Burleson, at USC. And we stumbled onto a catalyst. We thought that was really cool because it helped us think about the chemical mechanism. And it was literally one of those like in the shower moments when I had one of these transitions. You're actually talking about several different transitions, but I had one of these transitions where I was like, wait, we are making the reaction go faster. Like this is the reaction the planet uses to buffer atmospheric CO2. What problem are we trying to solve, right? Maybe we've got and I jumped out of the shower and like wrote down this back of the envelope, sort of calculation on what size factories we need and how many factories and this kind of thing. And it wasn't a crazy number that you would need something like 6,000 Walmart superstores, right, to running 24/7 all over the world, full of limestone and CO2 to do this. And that was sort of an aha moment of, oh, this could solve this problem at scale. And so much of what I've been learning about since then is that's not the issue. The issue is who actually wants it right now, today. And then it would be great if they were willing to pay you for it. But getting out of that mindset of this is a problem that the globe needs and that we need to, that like is very much the scientist approach, and getting more towards a customer focus of who is this person who owns 6 ships and what are his or her problems. That's been an incredible transition that I think Julie is sort of talking about. Like it's not okay. It's not enough just to know that you've got a thing about a good enough problem. Calcarea exists to be able to sequester CO2 at scale, but the first thing we have to do is sequester CO2 for somebody first. And learning that lesson has been a real switch for sure. I don't know, it just, so much of what you said resonated with me. I just started riffing.
Yeah. So along that line, what are some of the common challenges you see folks facing when trying to start a business?
Well, it's trying to make that shift to going from, wow, this is a huge problem and I can solve it 100 times better, but the world may not be ready for that solution. And so making that shift is one thing. Another thing in the university environment is very collegial. It runs at a certain pace. Startups run at a different pace. And depending upon what you're doing, there's an impedance mismatch between universities, research, and startup activity. And so that can be a bit of a challenge. The other thing is that on university campuses, people are encouraged to publish. and startups shouldn't publish because you don't necessarily want your competitors to know what you're doing. So there's a few sort of cultural shifts that university startups have to make in order to really step into this new world of startups.
Yeah, and on that note of, the university culture, as we've covered in this issue of the Caltech magazine, student entrepreneurship is actually really supported and kind of baked into the undergraduate experience here at Caltech. So what do you find most rewarding about working with student entrepreneurs in particular?
So one of my favorite elements of being an entrepreneur in residence at Caltech is an internship program that we created 3 years ago. And it's primarily for undergraduates. It's a 10-week summer program, and we try to pair up undergraduates with some of the startups that we've just brought out. Or we ask the undergraduates to help with the business plans of ideas that we think are coming out.
It's like the startup surf.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And I've been running so I've led 4 venture-backed companies. I've been running intern programs from the very start of doing startups, because when I was in college, someone gave me an internship and it changed my life. What I have found is that no matter how much I put into the internship, I get more back, because students bring an energy, they bring a different way of looking at the world, they bring a whole new joy to sort of the process of entrepreneurship that I find just really exciting.
Students have been crucial to Calcarea. Our first employee, Melissa Gutierrez, was a Caltech undergraduate, somebody who had worked in our labs, and I had heard that she was leaving a job she was in before, and I thought, Melissa's available? This would be fantastic, right? So getting more contact with students has been incredibly important for Calcarea.
Yeah.
So my favorite thing is that I come from a day and age where we use email, and then all of a sudden everybody started using Slack, and so I had my last crop of interns, and they were like, Slack, that's old news. We use Discord.
We just started
and it's sort of
using
like
Slack.
now things are changing so fast that each new generation, each new grade has a different set of tools. So interns help you, if nothing else, to keep up with what the latest activities are that are going on. So
That's absolutely true. Yeah, I've had to sort of give up on email. There are companies that plan this out, right? That like, here we're going to have email for this kind of thing, Slack for this kind of thing, phone calls for that kind of thing. It's like so much management that I can't do it.
So speaking of management, let's pivot a bit and talk about the role of a CEO. So Jess, this is your first time running a company. How is it different from running a lab?
Yeah, there is a skill set to both that you might find in really good camp counselors. And so in that sense, they sort of overlap. Those who know me and know my love of summer camps will know where that reference is coming from. But there are some really important differences, and I've been thinking about this a little bit. There's one on like research, like what does it mean to do research? And you were touching on the pace of it, and that's absolutely true. And one of the ways that the pace switches is that people become professors for different reasons, but a lot of us become professors because while we were students or postdocs or wherever along the way, there were just too many things that we wanted to work on. And there are only 24 hours in a day, and one of you, and you just couldn't pull it off. And you want a group, like you want to be able to seed all these ideas with these people that are smarter than you and are going to go learn more about it and then come back and teach you. And it's this centralized spoke relationship, right? Like, at least in my group, we don't all sort of, it's not like everybody's piled onto the same problem. People are working on different ones. From the outside world, it might all look like the same problem of the history of climate change or something like that. But to us, they really seem separate, and they're individual relationships about what the project is doing. At Calcarea, the whole point of the research is to work on the one thing of the company going forward, and that you have to like really stay focused that way. And that leads to a very different tenor of how you divide things up and how much people need to be talking to each other as they're working on these things. That's just on the technical side. And then there's this aspect of the talking to 100 people or more, right? This like business model research, like this, who are the customers out there and what do they actually want? And that has been a lesson in learning how to shut up. and I'm not very good at it. I'm still practicing, as you can tell. I realized how much we are like little salespeople in academics. Like anytime we sit down and we start talking about this great new discovery we have about coral biomineralization or whatever, we're selling this like idea that we have or this innovation we have to whoever the audience is. And if I've done this now with getting on the phone with customers, and you have to sell yourself to some degree to get the conversation to begin with, but at the end of a 45-minute call, if I've spoken the whole time, I know exactly the same amount about that company that I did when the call started, and Calcarea is no further along, right? And learning how to seed the conversation and then just try to hear what are their problems led to our first new patent last month, right? Because we realized that there is this acute pressure on the industry that they care about getting just a few % of their CO2 decarbonized on a short time scale, compared to me thinking about 50, 100% of the shipping industry kind of down the road. That aspect of switching to listening from switching to selling has been a big one. And then this part related to the research has been a change in leadership style that I'm still getting used to. That how you lead a group that is sort of a hub and spoke model is actually quite different than how you lead a group that everybody's focused on the same goal and you're trying to get there as fast as you can. It is tugging on my management abilities for sure. Like I'm really having to learn about that.
And Julie, you've been a successful CEO at multiple companies, so you've led many different groups. What are some of the common challenges you've experienced as a CEO?
Well, I'd like to riff off of what Jess said about sales. You said you had to switch from sales to listening, and what I would argue is that you're a great salesman and that great salespeople are great listeners too, because you spend a lot of time listening. So at the midway in my career, when I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur, somebody encouraged me to go get a job as a bag-carrying sales rep. So I went from being an executive of a public company to a bag-carrying sales rep in a startup. And this is a job in, I think, everybody who runs a lab who's trying to raise money, but you knock on the door, you run as hard as you can to the door, and 3 times you crash into the door, and the 4th time somebody opens the door. And that's the job of selling. And if you can master that job, both as a professor or as a CEO of a company, that is one of the best skills. That is one of the greatest predictors of success, because you're selling your idea to an investor, you're selling an idea to your employees, your future employees, you're selling your idea to your customers, you're selling all the time. Mm-hmm. So I would say one thing that I would encourage every CEO who's looking at doing a startup is make sure you've got the sales skills, because you'll be doing a lot of it. The other one is it's when you're in a startup where you have just a couple of people or a handful of people, you always are, the only thing you notice is your limitations, because what you're doing well, you don't notice. And so some people fall into the trap of recruiting people they like to spend time with, or people that have the same skill set. And the trick to making a startup work is to hire someone with an opposite skill set, because it increases your reach really dramatically, especially when you're a small team. So team dynamics are another one of those critical elements.
Yeah, we are a bunch of geochemists at Calcarea, a bunch. There's 3 of us that are employees, and then Will, my co-founder at USC also. And I have felt this very acutely, and I've gotten this advice from Julie and from other people, like you have to go find people, right? A company requires a team with diverse skill sets, and all of you guys are really good at titrations.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you can expand a bit more about building an effective team and what are some strategies for doing that?
Well, I think the first one is you look around.
Take notes.
You look around the table or wherever you're sitting, and does everybody look the same? Right away, that's a red flag to me. I think that diversity is good for many things, but especially startup teams. So looking for people with different skill sets. My big expression for building startup teams is you don't want the tuba player playing the flute. Is what you want to do is you want to take a person's natural skill set and extract the most out of that, as opposed to trying to have somebody who's great at selling, trying to do the accounting as well. And so that's a balancing act. So it's really recognizing what skills you have and saying, okay, what do I need to backfill? So you need to backfill your weaknesses. That's the trick to doing really effective planning of management teams. Another thing that happens a lot with startups is you get a couple of founders together and they get excited. Everybody gets excited at the beginning. It's really fun to name the company and to make the logo. And then you get down the road a couple of months and maybe things aren't going as well. And all of a sudden you realize that none of you have talked through what are you doing here? Why are you here? What happens if something goes wrong? What happens if we get into an argument? And so it's really important at the beginning stage of a startup, at the very beginning, is to have a what I would call a founder agreement, which is to say, here's what our goals are. And then if I'm not able to deliver, I'm going to walk away and give up my shares, or just put the parameters down on paper so that each of you know what's going to happen. It saves for a lot of heartache down the road, and very many founders will tell you that they wish they had done it. In some of my previous companies, I wish I had done it, because once you've raised money and the horse has left the gate, it's really hard to fix these kinds of mistakes.
Yeah, that really resonates. Not because we've necessarily made any mistakes, but Julie gave me this advice to have this founders agreement. And actually, there are three of us that are co-founders. Two of us, is me and my good friend Will. We had been working together long enough that we had those fights already. They weren't about the business. They weren't necessarily, well, sometimes they're about money because we're trying to share research funds. And Will and I know how to fight. And he can say things to me that from the outside, people would be like, that's it, those two are done. And I know where it's coming from. And it was an interesting dynamic with our third co-founder, with Pierre, who brought an absolutely crucial, a new skill set and a huge amount of energy, so much good, positive stuff. And yet we had this really solid relationship, time-tested over decades, and this new person coming in and figuring out how that was going to work was, you're never solved in something like that. Like there's no way to make up for time, really, but talking explicitly and actually getting into some fights and saying like there was a moment where I had to say to Pierre, and I'm sure he still remembers this, right, where I was like, Pierre, I don't necessarily believe that from you in the same way I do from Will, because I know how I can trust him, and we're not there yet. And I remember the look on his face. Right? It was absolute like shock. This is before we had actually signed the papers and were founders together. But I think it helped, right? Because it was a tense moment, and I was telling him, this is where I'm coming from. Like, this is where we're at. And really, it's to Pierre's credit that he just saw for what it was, let it roll off his back. We talked about it the next day. Yeah, he's a better person than me.
So it seems like you can't really shy away from conflict in a startup.
It's all about conflict. Like I don't know what it is. Maybe somebody, I'm sure, like there's so many books written, by the way. People give you books all the time. Like, you haven't given me any books. It's one thing I appreciate about you. But there's just like, there's this whole industry of making money off opinions about these topics, right? And so I guess you're getting this one for free over the web. But there's so many books about like how to be a leadership, or how to do leadership, how to do hiring. I think you really have to get in there and make mistakes and just hope that the trust level has been built high enough that you can get over those mistakes together.
Is there something you wish you had known or read in a book before you started this journey?
I am 5 months into this. Like, there's something I wish I'd done differently like every other day. Yeah, like I don't like accounting. I don't think I ever will. I'm not sure who, I thank God there are people out there who do like accounting, but we're a 3-person company. Somebody's got to do it. But backfilling the weaknesses this is a great example of it. Like, it's not something I like doing, and so it sort of falls to the side. And I'm like, oh God, we got to really catch up on the books. Fortunately, in a brand new startup, there is no balancing the books. All you do is spend. Like, you beg for money. People had enough faith in you to give you a bunch of money. And then you just need to be able to tell them, here's what I'm doing with the money on a sort of regular basis. That's the only way that you really do books. But besides that, I felt this way. This is a similarity with research. I felt this way about research as well. The point is to spend the money, not to hoard it. The whole point that you got the money was to push a thing forward. Was in research, it was to go after this idea or write these papers. And in a business one, it is, in some sense, to get to the next round, right? To be able to get more money. But you have to have a goal for the company. Calcarea's goal is to sequester CO2 at scale, and you need to have that in mind every single time that you make a decision. But don't let spending money get in the way. Like spending money is an accelerant. Not holding on to money is a brake. I know investors don't like to hear that, but that's the way I think about it.
Would you have anything to add to that, Julie, about things you wish you had known?
Oh, I think about it all the time. In fact, I think the reason I'm at Caltech as an entrepreneur in residence is because I learned so many lessons from so many mistakes that I thought, who can I give these lessons to? And who better than some of the brightest minds in the world who are trying to solve some of the biggest problems in the world. So, yeah.
Present company included.
Included, for sure. So, yeah, I think in retrospect, you make mistakes every single day, but
it's kind of the point.
Yeah, it's the
like literally. If you don't make a mistake, then you're not actually solving a new problem. Like it's a little like on the research side, the equivalent would be. I'm sorry, Julie.
No, go right ahead.
But on the research side, the equivalent would be like, well, I don't know the answer to that. I'm like, well, that's why it's called research. like the same thing is in making mistakes in a startup. Like if you're not doing it wrong at first, then it's a path that somebody else has already gone down. And one of the whole points is to open up. Like that's the way you have impact, is that you're actually doing something new. And everybody makes mistakes doing something new.
So one of the things for sure is, as now I'm investing in startups, I always say I can't pick the winners, but I sure can pick the losers. And the losers are easy to pick because they have certain traits. So one set of traits, one is they don't listen, they don't take feedback, they're not coachable. Another one is if you look around at the team and you see the same kind of face, just, it's all one type of person. So I think that that's the sort of pattern recognition from having done it so many times is the final one that I'd say is that a team that doesn't have conflict is headed for an iceberg. And I've seen companies where the CEO says X and nobody is able to question it, and those are the companies I tend to get very nervous about.
So we're just about to the end of our time before audience questions. So I wanted to wrap it up by bringing it back to Calcarea for a minute. And Julie, you actually invested in Calcarea and helped get it off the ground.
I just told you I was wantonly spending your money.
That's okay. It's an accelerant.
It's an accelerant, exactly.
So having worked with many different companies, what about Calcarea feels particularly compelling and exciting to you that you can say in front of Jess?
Oh,
yes.
That's not
well,
fair.
So I'll say my number one statement is Jess. In my first company, a very renowned venture capitalist said to me that they invest in team, market, and technology in that order. He said, because if the team is great and the market is big, if the technology turns out to be wrong, the great team will figure out how to pivot. So he started his thesis, and was a very wealthy, successful venture capitalist, was always start with the team. So in the case of Calcarea, the first day that I met Jess, he started this company for all the right reasons. As he said at the beginning, this is the existential problem of our generation, is to how to get rid of carbon in the atmosphere. And he believes in that and believes if he doesn't start this company, who is going to do it? And I really, really resonate with that message. So this deep, deep passion, this incredible talent, this ability to sell. So all the elements that make something successful are all there. So I don't pick a loser there. I see that this one has all upside.
I think the first part of what you said is very true, just sort of about Caltech in general. Like if you're onto a problem that you think is important, and it's really kind of our job to be working on problems that we think are important, making progress, right, is you have to believe in it. Like you have to say, you have to ask yourself at some point, how can I have a bigger impact, right? If this problem really is that important, whether it's something environmental or it's something on power or it's something on the social science, like, people say, oh, you're so passionate about this, and I've never really understood, like, yeah, like, why would?
But then it's infectious, and people want to work with you, and people want to invest in you because they know you mean it.
Yeah, no, we're going to try. I mean, and I've said this before, like, people with my sort of background are sort of ideally suited to bring a technical side to the way I think that, because it's how the planet solves the carbon dioxide problem when volcanoes go off. And so there should be, and it's kind of happening, actually, there should be more oceanographers, there should be more geochemists starting companies like this. And it's been kind of interesting. At the oceanography meetings, like the national meetings, they're now marine carbon dioxide removal, MCDR, because you have to make an acronym so nobody understands what you're saying, sessions just grown up in the last year when there was nothing like it. In fact, even the field was a little bit like, no, keep business away over here. It's been heartwarming to see how quickly the field's gone. There are a lot of passionate people out there. I'm not the only one.
Well, thank you both so much. We'd now like to take some questions from the audience, so I can welcome Omar back to the stage to facilitate some audience questions.
Thanks to you both. Let's see. Our first question is from Manish Bansal, an associate professor at Virginia Tech. The question is, how do you maintain a balance between running a company and publishing papers along with mentoring PhD students?
That's for Julie.
Oh, that's for you.
Yeah, you don't, I think is the short answer to that. And I tried that, and Julie sort of saw me in this period. I tried that for almost 2 years. I thought, professors, like, we're only busy 50% of the time. It's just every other minute. And so how do I sort of reorganize that time? I'm on leave from Caltech, and I'm on leave because you have to focus. Nominally, I'm on leave 80% Calcarea, 20% Caltech, and that's really like 120-40 or something like that. So that's, of course, always the academic solution, is just work harder. But honestly, it's the only way we would have raised money, too, because investors know this. Like, it wasn't until I said, yeah, I'm going to not do this, and I'm not going to do this professor thing for like 2 years, that we even had any hope of raising money. Isn't that right? Yeah.
That is true.
Okay. Our next question is from an anonymous viewer. How do you balance the challenge of having conversations with lots of companies to make sure that there's a market for your solution while still keeping your idea private?
This is an interesting one because I come from the Office of Tech Transfer, where we do all the patenting of technology and ideas, and I, for one, feel as though people hold on to privacy of data more than they need to when it comes to building a business model. Yes, there may be secrets and patentable activity. That's one thing, but what you're trying to accomplish, you will make far greater errors by holding things too close to the vest and not testing the hypothesis of what you're trying to build versus being more open with it. I have never been burned by being more open with what I was trying to accomplish in my career of running 4 venture-backed companies.
And yet there are all sorts of stories, and they get a lot of play in the media, of people getting burned along this way, right? And so it's in your head. It was absolutely in our head. And you're 100% right. Like, problems are best solved crowdsourcing. Like, you want to you have a good idea, but you don't have the full, it's really hubris, and we have it a lot as professors, to think that you really got the whole picture, right? And if you don't get out there and test your idea out in an open way, you're going to go too slow. And you have to have a moat. There's a word I didn't think I would ever use. Right? Oh, God, 6 months ago. And IP is a good way to do that, getting patents. And Calcarea has a couple, not just pending patents, but patents that we filed long ago, even before Julie, just like Dave Licata helped us with some of this early stuff. He was another really terrific entrepreneur in residence. But absolutely, we all make the mistake of keeping it close to our chest for too long. Don't
Now,
do
the only time I may have seen a few things is when maybe two people from the same lab decide to do a startup, and they may have similar ideas. But even in that case, sometimes competition is the best thing for a startup, because two companies going off to solve the same problem generally makes them each stronger, if that sounds kind of
That's a very American approach to capitalism.
Yeah, maybe.
Another anonymous question. What is the best way to research and contact possible investors for your startup?
Well, first thing is never call them yourself. They expect you to find someone who will make an introduction. So right out of the gate, you need to be connected to somebody who's well connected to venture capitalists. If you're at Caltech, you have our office, and that's something that my colleagues and I are able to do, is to help professors get a list of really curated venture capitalists. Other times you get to a single VC that you like and you vibe with, and they can make the introduction to others. And it's really important to know who you're calling on, because you don't want to call on somebody that only invests in consumer products. If you have a carbon capture company, that just doesn't usually work out too well. So it's a very good question. It's a very important thing to do, is to know exactly who you're calling on and finding someone to introduce you.
Yeah, to kind of follow up on that, Jess, can you talk a little bit about the funding options right now in the sustainability space and how you navigated those specifically? I know there's a lot of public money as well as private money, so could you talk about your experiences there?
My experience is that there is a lot of money out there in sustainability, or I know the carbon slice of sustainability a little bit better. I don't know a lot about the energy sector. I tend to go philosophical quickly and go to big scale, so I'll start with an answer to the question that way. Look, our country has a very large separation of the haves and have-nots, and the haves have too much money and they don't know what to do with it. And they're looking for places that they can invest so that they can grow their money. And so there are lots of bad ideas being invested in there. If you really think you've got a good idea, I think you can pull it off, especially in the sustainability carbon sequestration world. We have been that's a privileged statement from coming from a place like Caltech, where we're blessed with connections, for sure. Like they were super helpful, but we were able to get to a point where we had a very good relationship with one of our chief investors, the Grantham Foundation, from having funded us in our lab ahead of time, and so that was a great pathway. Was an existing funder who was interested in bringing this out to being something bigger, and their Rolodex, do people ever say that anymore? Rolodex, like their connections, their LinkedIn network was helpful to building in Calcarea's particular case. And so I'm answering this question by saying there's a lot out there, having had that first step already made for us or been facilitated for us. But once we started looking around, look, if you really got a good idea and you think you have a way to go make the case, make a 10-slide deck that has the problem listed, the team listed, and just like we've been saying, and you got a shot. Have confidence.
Julie, do you have anything else on that?
I would add that, people saying, like, how do I find the VC? If you get in front of VCs and you find that you don't feel a connection with that person, I would encourage you to walk away, because when you get money from a venture capitalist, they become like, it's not a marriage, but it's close. They never go away. And if you don't like them, it makes your life very, very unpleasant. So the relationship with the partner that's making the investment is very important. So that's as a starting point. Another one is that if you've made like 50 calls and you're not getting anywhere, stop, step back, and figure out what's wrong with your pitch, because over pitching is not a great way to get your company off the ground. In the case of Jess, he was turning away money, so that's a different.
I've only been I've been CEO for 5 months, and we were raising money for the year and a half before then or so. So I don't have a very good perspective. Anything Julie says is right about this.
Jess, you touched on this briefly. This is a question from me, but the idea of transitioning based on what the market expects or what the market or your client or your customer wants. I'm wondering if you could perhaps walk us through in a little more detail about a situation where you had to kind of adjust what you were doing or the product you were offering based on what the customers were asking for.
Yeah, absolutely. There's just in the last month or two, we've had an example of this. So the big picture part, and it's still the first goal of Calcarea, is to sequester CO2 at scale. And we think that it's a good match to do that through decarbonizing shipping, but then also using ships to go beyond that and become the garbage men of the CO2 economy. We think that we can store CO2 in the ocean safely and permanently using ships. That's Calcarea. That doesn't get you paid tomorrow, right? Like that keeps you motivated, and that's where you need to head, and you have to stay focused. And so in starting to talk to ship owners and ship operators, it became clear that this new regulatory pressure called the Carbon Intensity Index that came online January 1st of this year was really bugging them. And it's essentially a letter grade, like going to a restaurant. And they were fine with whatever letter grade they got as long as it wasn't an F. But to keep the grade, they have to get 2% better every year. And outside of slowing down, they don't, like literally making the ships go slower through the water, they don't quite know what to do after a few efficiency changes. And that became this switch of, wait, if we could do 10% of the CO2 that they have, that's 5 years that they could continue to operate a $120 million CapEx investment that they're trying to amortize over 20, 25 years or so. That they're all ears at 5 to 10%. That was not something I expected at all. That was like, oh, wait, well, we can do that like right now if you have some existing water flows on board. The limiting thing about what we're up to is the flux of water that you can bring in. And that totally changed the conversation to, what pumps are you running right now? Where are they? Instead of, how can I retrofit your ship when it next comes into dry dock? That led to thinking about sock scrubbers, and I can talk about this because we submitted the patent last month. But there are, the IMO 2020 was the regulation that ships had to reduce their sulfur emissions by a factor of 7. And they did it two ways. They bought lower sulfur fuel, or they installed scrubbers on stacks, and they're pumping water all the way up to the tops of the stacks or mid stacks to get the sulfur dioxide out. And we can just stick our thing on the back end of that. That is coming out at like pH 2 or 3. And so our process using limestone actually neutralizes that acid. And so it does something even better than what they're already doing. So we can sequester carbon and neutralize what's coming out. In January, I had no idea. In fact, sock scrubbers were sort of a problem at the investment raise because they had a lot of bad press, and people saw us as just a carbon version of the open loop sock scrubber, and were like, well, no, I don't want to touch that. So that was a big pivot for us.
Julie, do you have examples from your own experience?
Oh, pivot. I did a company that was in the ad tech space, and it required, it was a way of increasing the amount of time customers would spend on a page, increasing the amount of time that customers would click on additional ads, and it required permission from Google for us to really make this the strongest thing that it could possibly be. And I was away on vacation, and only things. When you're in the startup world, you'd never go on vacation because when you do, the world collapses. I was on the top of the Eiffel Tower, and I got a call from my team that Google had shut us down, and that was my whole business model was built on top of working hand in hand with Google. So, just like anything else, sit in a room, and we created a war room, and we figured out how can we deliver the service that we had created without tripping the rules. And it's just, you lean on every member of the team, including the administrative help, and the best ideas come from the strangest places. So you're constantly pivoting in this job.
All right, and I think this will be our final question for the evening. What is the one piece of advice you'd have for someone thinking of making the transition from scientist to CEO?
I don't. I'm so in the middle of my own stuff that of thinking about like the one piece.
I will say it. I will say it. First of all, I think entrepreneurs are the heroes. And I think that if we're going to solve the climate crisis, it's going to be solved through innovation. And the innovation isn't just coming up with the idea, but it's getting the idea out to the marketplace. So I think you have to view, research is wonderful, curing cancer is wonderful, and there's a lot of that going on here at Caltech. But bringing it out to the marketplace and taking the risk of failing, because there is a lot of failure, is a heroic challenge. And I think that all entrepreneurs should be applauded, and anyone who thinks they want to do it should give it a try.
Yeah, I think that Julie said it just right. That I would say something similar to that. Like, if you're already at that spot that you're thinking, hey, maybe I want to try that, do it. That would be my one piece of advice, because we probably held back too long, even with Calcarea, humming and hawing about, is this the right thing to do? Maybe I can pull this off while still being a professor, getting back to one of the earlier questions. If it's in your head, it's there for a reason. Feed it.
Right, that was our last question, Lori.
Thanks, Omar, and thank you both so much for joining us today. I sure learned so much about entrepreneurship from speaking with you both. And thank you to our audience for those great questions and engagement. And now we will hear some closing remarks from Michael Alexander.
Thank you very much for that really interesting presentation. It's now time to just say goodbye to you, but before you go, I do want to remind you that you can keep track of our programs by going to events.caltech.edu. You can sign up to be on our mailing list. You can consider to become a donor and member of the Friends of Beckman Auditorium and support our programs for young people. We hope you'll be back for our Movies That Matter program that takes place on July 25th, 7 o'clock. It's an in-person program. You have to be in the auditorium to see the film Chasing Coral. And we just want to thank again Lori Dajose, Jess Adkins, Julie Schoenfeld, and Omar Shamut. And thank you all for joining us this evening. Good evening.